Hello and welcome. I'm going to let everybody get into our Zoom webinar room first before we get started. We are excited that you are joining us on this afternoon, Tuesday afternoon in May. This is our second in our series of working on accessibility issues. And so I'm excited to have our Maylin with us and our speakers here. And just to let you know who I am, I'm Jeanette Henderson. I'm the community coordinator here for APJ. I think that's it. I think that's all for me. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to introduce our speakers today.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. So welcome to everybody. My name is Sharon Graper. I'm the Director of Education at Holden Forest and Gardens, and I am the outgoing chair of the education community. So wanted to thank everybody for coming. If you haven't come to the community before, we're excited to have you. We usually have about 4 webinars a year on different topics. The past couple, we have really worked to partner with other communities, other actions or initiatives that the association has had, and that's been great because, as we all know, in what we do, we cross over. You may put us in a community, but a lot of times what we do works in a lot of the communities. So that's been really successful, and we're excited to continue that tradition today. So the other thing I wanted to say is, if you are new to the community or if you're not, we have a chair and a vice chair. If you have been around, elections were held in March. I was the vice chair for 2 years and then the chair for 2 years. So starting June 1st, I will relinquish my authority to Sarah, who is the current vice chair. Sarah Fiorella will become the chair, and Libby Rhodes, who is on as well, will become the vice chair. So I'm very excited to have them take over the reins. I've worked both with Sarah and Libby for the past 4 years on symposium and other things, and the community will be in great hands going forward. I really would encourage you to get involved in the community. It's been one of the most probably rewarding things that I've done in my probably 30 years of public garden education, just because meeting people, making friends with them, going to places, knowing that there's somebody that you can send a text to, send an email to, who's going through the same thing as you are, really is great. And it's great to have those colleagues who are not in your own backyard, because everybody is really just willing to help each other out. So I would encourage you, if you've not gotten involved more than just attending the webinars, to do that, to use the forum, to come to the webinars and things like that. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who is the incoming chair of the community, to introduce the topic for today and our speakers.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for everything you've contributed. It's been really fun being co-chair with you. But we're all here to talk today with some special guests that Maylin invited. And so I'd like to introduce Maylin, who will introduce our special guests. I want to say that this webinar came to be from asking all of our colleagues, what topics do you want to explore as they relate to education? And accessibility was number one, and accessibility has many umbrellas. Today, our focus is going to be really on from low tech to high tech, the type of approaches we can institute in our gardens to make our gardens and grounds more accessible. And so here to introduce our special guests is Maylin Plummer. She is the director of the Idea Center, whom we've collaborated with on this program. And the Idea Center is a joint program with both the Denver Botanic Gardens and the American Public Garden Association. All of us are really grateful for all of the resources you've offered all of our communities. So I'm really grateful and thank you for collaborating with us today, Maylin. So I'll hand it over to you to introduce our special guests.
Thank you so much. As always, it's great to collaborate, and it's just great to be here. Thank you for the warm reception. So welcome, everyone. Please feel free to share where you're joining us from in the chat. I think that will help our guests to see kind of, where you are and where you're joining us from. My name, as mentioned, is Maylin Plummer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director for the IDEA Center for Public Gardens. For those that might be unfamiliar, the IDEA is Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. I'm truly excited to facilitate today's topic, Up Your Accessibility Game, on behalf of the education community and the IDEA community. And I'm just extra thrilled to have had the opportunity to partner with our guest speakers, Dan Lamarco and John McCarthy of Barton Rogers Group and Nikki Shaw from Storm Interface. This conversation comes in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And that was back on May 15th, and it began about 14 years ago. So we are inviting you to look into the future of accessibility and what gardens of all sizes and budgets can do to improve access for visitors with disabilities. Our intentions for today are to provide a brief overview of some existing laws under the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically any changes or things that are kind of up and coming. As well as including Communications, Video, and Technology Act that is expected to pass into later this year. There's also, various things that we in the public sector can do to ensure compliance with ADA laws, but there's also this whole exciting realm of new interactive technologies that are really changing and advancing accessibility norms and becoming more and more mainstream. And we'll make sure that we have time at the end for some Q&A. So we hope you will not only take away greater awareness of advancements in accessibility, but we're also asking you to be part of a sustained call to action to continue advancing equity for people living with disabilities. And we hope that this information shared today will provide both the moral and business case for investing in accessibility technology. So with that, I welcome Dan Lamarco and John McCarthy, as well as Nikki. And I believe both of you will be in attendance at the annual conference. And so for folks that might be joining us online, hey, if you're at the conference, please come by the Barton Rogers exhibit booth and introduce yourself. And I'll be, of course, in the IDEA lounge holding up conversations. So I'm going to start with Dan and then I think John to just introduce yourselves and share again, what it is that you do, and maybe share why or how did you get into doing this very specific kind of niche work.
Sure. Thank you, Maylin. My name is Daniel Lamarco, founder and CEO of Barton Rogers Group. Now, I always like to say, titles don't really mean much, and in our organization, they really don't. But that said, what we do, we have really two purposes for doing what we do. Number one is to make the world a more accessible place, and to do that using technology and digital solutions. The second one, which is a greater reach, but believe it or not, accessibility and safety go hand in hand, is to actually eliminate active shooting incidents. And you might be like, well, where does accessibility and active shooters play? You're going to learn that today, because accessibility and security actually do go hand in hand. Now, how did we get involved in all this? We started out with our first customer is the United States Senate offices. So we are now at the United States Senate officers, multiple state legislatures, the Veteran Affairs in every single state. And so what we do is digital signage, which is pretty straightforward, right? You've got a sign, it's got, a name, maybe it has an ad on it or something else like that, but also wayfinding. And so digital wayfinding is different than having signs directing people where to go. Digital wayfinding is where you actually have an electronic digital map of your environment, which means if it's digital, it can be exposed to other things. So other devices, whether it's digital devices like a mobile phone, whether it's a device such as a haptic feedback vest for someone who is sight disabled, or even what's called a glide device, which is what people are starting to do instead of actually using a cane. So we got involved in all of this actually via the United States Senate offices. And I can tell you, at the United States Senate, they're very, very interested in promoting accessibility, especially with the new capabilities around artificial intelligence. So we work very closely with the Congressional Accessibility Office. We also work very closely with the U.S. Capitol Police because, again, accessibility and safety actually go hand in hand, and we'll get more into that. But we've been at this for about 6 years now. We're very passionate about it, and looking forward to bringing some of our ideas and solutions to the Public Gardens Association. So, John?
Yeah, hi, my name is John McCarthy. I'm Dan's partner here in this venture, based in Washington, D.C., and I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible in the upcoming event. I'll simply say that I wholeheartedly support Dan's passion as it relates to making all things possibly, whenever possible, accessible to as many people as possible. It's it's near and dear to my heart for personal reasons, and I'm just very honored to be able to combine that kind of interest with bringing this message and these opportunities to organizations like yours. So I'll pass this on to Nikki.
Thank you. Thanks, John. So I'm Nikki Shaw, and I work for a company called Storm Interface, and you probably aren't familiar with our company, but you may well have seen our products, even though you probably, as sighted, possibly able-bodied people that you are, haven't realised what the devices are for, but they're installed. We're kind of specialists in self-service accessibility. So we're actually a keypad manufacturer historically. And then several years ago, about 20 years ago, we were approached to create a keypad for a very large cemetery in Washington or Virginia somewhere, because this was before I joined the company, because they had a keypad there where a keyboard where people could go. It was totally unmanned in all weathers. But the idea was that using this keyboard and a touch screen, folks could go to find where their ancestors were buried in this humongous graveyard. So they had a keypad that kept failing and keyboards that kept failing. They came to us because our background was in very robust industrial keypads. And we worked with the Trace Research Centre, who were at the time pioneering this use of different shaped keys and tactile idents to help blind people, use computers. So that's why you'll now feel an F and J little home pips on your keyboards and things like that. So tactile identifiers that will help blind folks use self-service became our thing, because we suddenly realized it was like a light bulb going off, one of those light bulb moments. Oh my goodness, there's nobody out there doing this in any kind of shape or form for self-service. And back then there wasn't that much call for it. It was very much about selling the idea of accessibility to people creating kiosks and point of sale equipment. More and more recently, in the last 10 years, I would say it's gotten a little bit easier. In terms of, yes, there have been more lawsuits filed, which is not good because we don't want drive-by lawsuits. But if those lawsuits are actually driving change, then it's a good thing in my books, because self-service is permeating every part of our life because of various reasons, and in various different markets, it's various reasons that are driving that. But it's here to stay. It's not going away anywhere. So we're trying to help companies make that equipment more usable. So forget just checking the box because you want to avoid a lawsuit. Let's try and make it usable by as many people as possible. And it's one of those businesses where I never really wanted to get into sales, and I've been doing this now with Storm for 16 years. But through this job, I've gotten to meet lots and lots of people with a variety of disabilities, and hearing various life stories and how people are at the stage in their lives where they're at with whatever disability they're living with is such a wake-up call to me to think, oh my goodness, why on earth is this being ignored? So to me, it's like John said, for personal reasons, I'm always very motivated to go out there. I'm very passionate about accessibility. So I'm really happy that Maylin invited me on this today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Thank you so much, Nikki and Dan and John. Well, I'm going to jump in because I'm sure folks are really anxious to go ahead and dive into some of our topical questions. So I'm going to start with Dan, and of course, John, feel free to jump in. to go ahead and provide a brief overview of some of these existing laws under the American with Disabilities Act, and in particular, like things that might be changing, right? That are going to especially impact public serving institutions, and so sometimes it might be something new, something that we've known and it's changing. But then you've also brought up in the past, Dan, like there are some pending things happening within the Communications, Video, and Technology Act that is expected, and I assume still expected, to pass into law later this year.
Yeah, so I'll start off by talking about ADA, which I think everyone's very, very familiar with ADA and accessibility, and that could mean from the physical ADA, do you have ramps, are paths of a certain width, and the botanical gardens is a little bit different, right? Because there are some gardens that, due to their elevation and terrain changes, do present a challenge in that regard. But in general, ADA has always been interpreted to be this physical accessibility more than anything else. And so there's ADA, which kind of applies to everyone. There's what's called ADA Title II, which is for really more targeted towards states and municipalities that are over 50,000 people in size. And then there's Title III, which is actually those municipalities that are less than 50,000. And those that ADA, it's still ADA compliance, but based on a municipality's size, that they're not as held to the standard as others were. But with Title II and Title III, which take effect in 2026, and I want to say 2027, but those things, those are going to be playing a part in terms of thinking about accessibility. And then there's also, some of you might be familiar with Section 508, which really deals with federal government type stuff. But then there's also what's called the Communications, Video, and Technology Act of 2023. Now, this was expected to have passed last year. It did make it out of committee, which means that there's enough people to actually vote on it and pass it, but it didn't get passed by the previous Congress. So it's pending reintroduction, but it won't have to go through the committee, all of the different committees levels and processes that it would have to do before. So what is the Communications, Video, and Technology Act? That's, again, it's not law. It will probably pass into law, during this congressional session. But what it does is that it says, okay, anything publicly facing, any information, whether it's a mobile application, website, PDF document that gets presented to the public, digital signage, any information that is publicly facing, that information has to be accessible to a person with hearing, sight, or physical disabilities as somebody who is not. They need to have the same level of access to that information. The mode might be different. It might be something from closed captioning, which you might be very familiar with, sign language as well. It could be your website and making sure that it is able to be read by a screen reader, which is very, very important, by the way, and ties into what Nikki's going to be talking about. But this information has to be structured in such a way as to make it accessible. And so, I'll give you a for example of what some of the corporate world is thinking about. So imagine you're in a conference room, and one of the people that are in there are deaf. They cannot hear. But they do know sign language, and they can respond in sign language, right? So they're non-auditory. And so what that corporation would be required to do is to provide some means of that person to be able to communicate via sign language. Now, as you know, sign language experts and translators can be pretty expensive. However, with artificial intelligence now, and we do provide this service, you can have a metahuman avatar that will do sign language bidirectionally with that individual to provide that kind of accessibility. But that's the kind of thing that you should be thinking about as we move along here. And so from a law perspective, kind of keeping it tied to that, there's, of course, ADA Title 2 and 3, but with the advancement of technologies, what you'll need to be thinking about is, okay, if I'm digital and everything's moving to digital, I have to make sure that my digital strategy is accounting for that, and where I'm adhering to the laws of accessibility for websites and mobile applications and digital signage and things like that.
Thank you, Dan. That was really helpful. And I think the thing that kind of what you described kind of brings to mind just a couple things, right? Like, especially when it comes to ASL, and I can speak for just the few gardens that I've either worked at, we would love to have people who can interact with guests and visitors in ASL, but finding, people who are available or taking the time to train people, right, to learn ASL is an investment. And a lot of our organizations struggle with, I'm just going to say it, capacity and resources. So that's, money, time, right? All of that. And so I think that this is, this conversation with technologies, it's providing a solution that perhaps we haven't really thought about before, because it's like very whiz bang futuristic, right? With screens and saying things like avatar. And I don't know that everybody on this call knows what an avatar is. So just to be kind of honest, right? Like, I think that technology is advancing in such a fast way, but I think it also can provide some solutions. So I think you spoke well to that. And so I just kind of wanted to just bring that up, because just acknowledging, the audience we have here. So in relation to some of the changes that you were talking about, what are some simple things that can be done to ensure compliance with ADA laws? And, what you and I have talked about in the past is like, right, there's like the low and there's the mid, and then there's the ultra whiz bang high end cost. But we'll get to that second part of that question, which is it an investment? Is it also revenue generating and all that good stuff? But we're going to hold that part of the question to the next bit, because I think that's going to be in the back of folks' mind is, how much is this going to cost us, right? How much of a capital campaign are we going to have to do to afford a robot? So like, I think that we'll separate that into the second part of this question. But what are just, if you can speak to some of these kind of simple changes, low, mid, high?
So on the lower end, and I'm going to call out a couple of botanical gardens here. So the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, so they have their 5 senses garden, which is really kind of specifically geared for people who might be hearing or sight disabled. Things are also a little bit lower, include if they are physically disabled. Coastal Maine Botanical Garden does the same thing. The Denver Botanical Garden does a fantastic job, because they have the sensory processing and autism kits to make things. And I'm sorry, I got a cold, but so there's like gardens out there that have really kind of taken that accessibility, and what does that mean? And you can call it inclusion, right? So I gotta say, there are some gardens out there doing some great things in terms of like even tables that go up and down if they're having an event where they're potting things. So I would encourage, all the gardens to kind of take a page from some of those. Now, some of the other lower level things that you can do is really kind of take a look at your website and make sure it's accessible. So there is a website you can go to called levelaccess.com. am always going out and getting information on accessibility and digital from that website. So levelaccess.com. I would encourage you to go there. Braille signs. So again, kind of low end, but important, because for those who are sight disabled, they do read those Braille signs. As a matter of fact, on all of our kiosks, and so we do digital signage, wayfinding, kiosks, robots, but kiosks, all of our kiosks, if it's a keyboard, more than likely, unless it's requested not to, it's a Braille keyboard. Although keep in mind, only 20% of people who are sight disabled actually know Braille. But what Nikki's going to talk to actually solves that problem and maybe even a more elegant way for things that require a screen reader. But other lower level things, Braille labels, making sure that your pathways, where possible, given the terrain, are wide enough. You're going to be seeing more and more. So here's a little crazy factoid for everyone. The number of people who are expected to be sight or hearing impaired in the next 20 years is expected to double. So it's going to make accessibility, and that's for a couple of reasons, by the way. Yeah, the population is getting older, but these phones that we all carry around and look into all day long are definitely killing our eyes, and the earbuds are killing our ears. So Braille, very important. Sensory markers, with Braille, very important. Pathways, adjustable potting tables where need be. So be thinking, okay, if I'm in a wheelchair, then I need to access something. Is that potting table too high? Do I need to bring that a little bit lower? It also figures into your websites as well, and making sure that your websites are fully, accessible and readable by a screen reader, because there are devices which Storm Interface makes, and which we include in all of our kiosks, which allow a sight disabled person to actually navigate a touch screen. So the world's becoming a much more digital place. Interacting with that digital place is becoming more and more commonplace, and enabling these things on the lower end definitely feeds into the higher end, but on the lower end, those are things that you want to be thinking about.
I included in the chat a link to, you mentioned Level Access. I put that in the chat, but also I recently learned that Barton's Garden partnered with local organizations there in the Philadelphia area, organizations and people who are sight disabled, low and blind, and they created audio descriptions. And this is something they were able to put onto their website. And some of the other things that we've talked about, and many of you might know Katie Sampson, who does a lot of work with the association as well as the Idea Center, talks about know before you go videos, right? Just people being aware when they are getting prepared to visit your space, is that they have a sense of what to expect. And that is what we talk about in the accessibility world. Accessibility is for everyone, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to be disabled. This is also helpful for everyone. So thank you for that, Dan. And I wanted to also just say, I appreciate you providing some of the stats and the data. And I think one of the things that you've talked about before is just overall population wise, when we're looking at, the population in the United States, and this is one of those things, unlike inclusivity related to, our ethnicity or other factors, disability can happen at any point in time, and it can happen to anybody in any socioeconomic, any age, right? Any ethnicity. And so I think that's what's really fantastic about having conversations around accessibility, is that it actually cuts across inclusivity for so many different demographics. Okay, so I think I squirreled for just a moment there, but Dan, on the kind of, you talked about kind of the I think I would categorize what you just described as more low and even mid. What are some of them the more high interface or technology, or I don't want to say solutions is maybe the better word. It doesn't have to necessarily be technology, but that more high-end type of things that maybe we can work towards.
So one of the things that I'm going to start off with is actually throwing it over to Nikki to talk about, one of the what I think is a pretty intriguing device called the Storm Interface Nav Pad, which, as she mentioned, you're starting to see in airports. Shake Shack, Target is putting them in all of their stores, Walmart. So Nikki, I'm gonna turn it over to you to talk about that.
Thank you. I was going to say, because this is probably more like the kind of mid-hanging kind of fruit, I guess you would say, Mylene. Because as we know, self-service, and there's possibly a lot of the gardens are looking towards maybe having check-in kiosks. And I would totally agree with Dan in that the low-hanging fruit to me would be really your online presence, your website, probably it's your shop front. To me, I would make that's the bit, because if you're competing with, a family that's going out on a Sunday afternoon, where should we go? What's open today? And they're doing a Google search. You want to entice them to go to your gardens rather than go to the shopping mall or wherever else to spend their dollars and their time. So, that's your shop front. Definitely make it usable where people with screen readers. Definitely, as Mylene says, have the know before you go, especially for people who have maybe unseen disabilities, even anxiety. Where do I park? How much is it going to cost? Are children under 18 allowed in for free? Like, how much can I take my own food in? All of these things play into people's concerns, and it advises them as to, well, you can go here, or you can't afford that this week, it's going to be a treat, whatever. So I think websites and the know before you go, and even have a really great description of, especially for sight impaired folks, their journey from literally the curbside, where they're going to park in relation to the building, in relationship to where they're going to be able to buy the tickets for the garden. Are the entrances, accessible? Is there a cobbled path that they're going to feel with their walking, their white cane as they're going up? All of these kind of indicators. And I would definitely encourage everybody to get involved with the local National Federation of the Blind chapter. They have chapters all over America, and they're often in communication with other disability advocate groups in that city. So I would definitely, at the grassroots level, find out what people need to know before they go. So that would be definitely something. And then if you are thinking of any kind of self-service or interactive digital signage, as Dan just sort of alluded to, like wayfinding or check-in kiosks, then yes, that's definitely where, me and sort of the skills that my company brings to the table can help. Because although we make actual physical devices, and I'm just going to show you the one that you'll probably see if you eat a lot of fast food. This little guy here, I've got him in a panel. So this little guy here is a navigation keypad with an audio jack. I can't get it any closer to the camera because I have to keep it connected. And then a volume key. And in various shapes or forms, Dan's using the slightly big brother of this that has a few extra keys to control the speed of audio and volume. But these are very tactile devices. And the idea is the likes of McDonald's have them, or they're starting to roll them out on all of their kiosks. Taco Bell have them on theirs. Various shapes and sizes. You'll come across these on the baggage check-in kiosks at all the airlines, in all the airports. United States Postal Service use them. There's lots of brands. I'm trying to name all of the ones that are out in the wild because we're under NDA. But so we work with lots and lots of government institutions for these kind of devices because they provide that tactile interface with an audio output mechanism for discrete audio as well. So not via speakers, because somebody who's hard of hearing may need to have their own, assistive headset connected. So the idea is that if somebody's discovering the world by touch, for example, on a kiosk, they would be able to locate this device, sometimes by some braille or tactile signage that's attached to the kiosk. And I think I'd say to all my customers, I think I probably said this to you, Dan, at some point, braille signage is a great idea, but don't just stick to the braille dots. wherever you can, have raised tactile ident. So if there's a universally recognized symbol for the headphone jack, and it's, the curved symbol, always include something like that, so that somebody who doesn't read Braille knows that, oh, that's the raised headphone symbol, that must be the audio jack. So like lots of little things sort of that you can do. And so if you're thinking of investing in kiosks, which are actually a great idea because they're always going to give a consistent, experience for your visitors and things, which is brilliant. If they're having a bad day, nobody's going to know about the kiosk having a bad day. But so long as the customer interface has been very well written, will walk users through who may be sight impaired or have other physical disabilities, so long as that customer interface software has been well written. And again, Storm, we can put you in touch with specialists in that area, and we can certainly provide a lot of, I'll call, free of charge information to you guys as well. So, because we have a best practices guide, which is some tips and pointers for software developers. So there's lots of things that you can do to make these experiences as interactive as possible. But my one thing is, in terms of the low hanging fruit, is to get your local blind and disabled communities involved through advocacy groups, because they are the best ones who can advise as to what might be needed. And you said, Maylin, about the auditory descriptors as people are walking around gardens. That's fantastic, because there's some airports that are looking into doing that as well, because blind folk going through airports, it's often a very confusing experience with, all sorts of noises coming from all sorts of places. So yes, something being provided discreetly on the user's phone that's navigating them to help them get to their gate or whatever is a brilliant idea. So anything like that you can do, with the help of the blind community would be fantastic.
Thank you. Well, and airports, just to be frank, are just terrifying for the able-bodied,
yes,
people with disabilities.
Yep.
I can only imagine. And I think what I think also is just really interesting, and again, about the audio tours that Bartram's created with the community there, is that these are things you can download before you go, or you can listen to them and you don't have to necessarily go to the garden. And as much as we love it when people come to see us and come into our spaces, that's not a reality for a lot of people beyond just disabilities, right? Like, I think this is also an economic situation sometimes. And so I think this is an interesting time for us to really explore how people experience and engage with our spaces. It doesn't always mean that they're going to be physically there and present. And yet there's still a value with that. And I love just, Nikki, you brought up just, how widespread this is happening. I didn't realize it. It was almost kind of like overnight that I noticed, going into a Wendy's or going into an airport, all of a sudden there's these kiosks everywhere. And I was just like, and they're at different heights, or, full screens that are, floor, looks like they're like, 6 feet or whatever. And it was just like, it's popped up overnight. And I don't think I really thought about it from an accessibility standpoint, to be honest. At the beginning, I was thinking more like convenience and like long lines and not wanting to hire people, things like that. But actually, I think this brings in another perspective of it from an accessibility experience. But also for those who don't really feel comfortable interacting, people with neurodiversity, right, or neurodivergence. So I think that it's really multifaceted. And before we say no, we have to kind of think about the diversity of experiences that are out there and how ultimately people get to experience purchasing a ticket, finding their way through, finding shade on a sunny, hot day, or, or interacting in different languages. So I think that what that's speaking to is how quickly technology is advancing norms.
And even from a common sense point of view, though, we work, because obviously we're a British manufacturer, our head office, I'm the US based Brit, even with this accent. I actually have lived here for 20 years. I live in Phoenix. So we're a UK organisation, but we actually work a lot with the Royal National Institute of Blind People back in England, because they have a big laboratory not far from our office, where, if we've got any product prototypes and things, we always show them to those guys before we kind of go too much further with it, just to make sure that we're on the right track. But I know they've talked about, and I think it was Oxford University in England, that an accessibility team there came up with the idea. And again, to me, this is we talked about low-hanging fruit, because no matter who you are in this world, you're under some sort of budgetary constraint, even the Walmarts of this world, let's face it. So they talked about creating personas, because if you haven't experienced any kind of disability through yourself or your own family, like you say, often we're going about our own business. We know our own limitations, but we just do it, and we don't really think about what would this journey through the airport be like if I couldn't see, or if I was in a wheelchair or whatever like that. So we tend to not, unless it's actually hitting home, to us personally. So the Oxford University study came up with the idea of creating personas. So you would give them names. There could be Joe, and he could be, have some sort of neurodivergence, or it could be Stella, and she's in a wheelchair. And they actually said, be as descriptive, really be able to picture these people in your minds as though they are your friends, and create several, a dozen different people, and then really kind of take time. I know it sounds really crazy, and they weren't, smoking any kind of mushrooms or anything when they came up with this study. It really was to describe, have lots of different people, all the disabilities that we can think of that we know of: Parkinson's disease and a tremor, blindness, being in a wheelchair, reach and movement issues, maybe an amputee, all these things that, we can think about. Let's create people, and then let's have, could Joe use this product, or could Joe, how would Stella wheel through the garden in her wheelchair? All of these. And I know this was real low-hanging fruit, but I know when it's been used very properly, there's been a few times that the RNIB have explained to us how they've adopted this system for some of their user testing. And obviously with all the background knowledge that they have. And I'll have to see if I can find it, Maylin, and I'll share it with you, and you can share the links. But I thought it was a really good idea, because it's only through this job and the friends that I've made. And now when I'm checking out at a self-service checkout, and I know a gentleman who's in a wheelchair and he can't reach very far, I'm looking and I'm thinking he wouldn't be able to reach the plastic bags because of where they're positioned on this self-service checkout. Stupid things like that. But that's only because I know, Andy. So it's being able to picture the person, I think, definitely helps.
I like that. And I think that's really helpful. I'd like to, I think this is the part where I think Dan gets really super excited, is he gets to share all the coolest, whizzy bang stuff that's out there and happening that really blew my mind. And how I'd like to kind of transition that over is just kind of examples, right? As many gardens that I've visited, the whole topic of wayfinding is really interesting, because it's like also understanding almost like a behavioral science behind it, right? Like, what are people going to need and want to know? And that includes interpretation, and how do we, and as public gardens, we are very much a very public facing kind of representatives, and we tell stories, we translate stories of human relationship with plants, but also the ecological world, right? And the plant world. So it's always trying to figure out how to do that. And when Dan, you started sharing some of these kind of AI tuned in, we're always thinking, what's the label, and do we use a QR code? And you're going, hey, you can also ask this guide bot or this road bot this question of what is this plant, or take me to the Asian garden, or where can I find shade in on a hot day, where can I go? So I think it's this whole level of interaction, not to supplant or replace people and human relationships. We just know that we can't be everywhere to everyone all the time. And I think that's where this piece, I'd love for you to share some examples that I know make you happy.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to apologize for working on my cold here. I'm also going to give a shout out to I think it's Jennifer McDowell from the Kingwood Center Gardens in Mansfield, Ohio. I grew up just outside of Mansfield in Medina, Ohio. So I gotta give a shout out to the local. So I'm going to take you down the rabbit hole a little bit, but I'm going to try to do it gently and softly. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you an example of something that John and I are actually currently working on, and that was a request from the Cincinnati airport. And I'll read it to you. What their request was is they're looking for design, development, and implementation of a comprehensive digital mapping solution specifically tailored for individuals who are blind or have low vision. Okay, the goal of the project is to create an accessible digital navigation system that enhances the travel experience for those individuals, ensuring they can safely navigate through the airport with the same ease and confidence as other passengers. It should include interactive features and services to address specific navigational and informational needs. So that's like their mission statement of what they're trying to do, and their approach. And like I said, this is something that John and I are currently working on. So the first thing, that when you bring it all down to the very, very basics, it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to have a digital interaction, I probably need to start with a digital map, right? So all the botanical gardens are probably, well, we've got our map, and we can hold it up and we can look at it and we can see where all the paths go. And more often than not, it might just be a piece of paper. It might be I go to the botanical garden website and I can look at it there. But it's not interactive. It's not interacting with anything. And if it is printed out, then things do change and get moved around. So I'm going to start sharing here, and hopefully how this goes, doing stuff live. So we'll hope that it all works out. So I'm going to share my entire screen here, and we'll minimize this for now. But so one of the things that we do is we work with a company called Mapped In. And that's where we can take a map of a airport, a botanical garden, a office building, an office complex, a college campus, a hospital. But basically, we take that map and we turn it into this 3D representation of what your environment may look like. And within that map, you have your points of interest that you identify along the way. So whether that's the entrance, whether it's a service desk, a concierge that somebody walks up to, but you really need to have that digital map. And here's why. So let's say I am a blind person, and instead of using a white cane, I'm using what's called a glidance. So Glidance is a company. They make this device right here. And what this device does is this replaces the white cane. And this is how people, basically you can talk to it and say, where do you want to go? And that will follow you along your path. So for example, we're in the United States Senate office buildings. If someone walked into the United States Senate and said, take me to Senator Schumer's office, and they had this device, we have the capability of, because we have a digital map, we can integrate with that device. We can authenticate, automatically, and they can tell it where to go, and off they are. Now, this is early, but it is in use in quite a variety of places. But these are things you need to be thinking of as far as, wow, the world is changing, and artificial intelligence has just really opened up the world to more capabilities in terms of things like this. I don't have to be tapping around with a cane. Now, other things that are coming, are haptic feedback vests. So a haptic feedback vest is, again, designed to give someone who is sight disabled haptic feedback, on their body, in terms of, do I need to go left? Do I need to go right? Do I need to go forward? Excuse me, do I need to go backwards? But it gives them physical signals as they're navigating their environment. But again, it has to integrate with a digital map. The digital map is like the basis of everything. Also, and I will say, where glasses are coming in, you've all probably seen like the Google glasses or maybe even the Meta. There's what's called Envision glasses, but basically there are now glasses that based on where you're turning your head and things like that, it describes the environment to you. So this is artificial intelligence identifying the different objects that are out in your environment, describing them to you so that you might not be able to see it, but you can certainly envision it in your mind. Again, I am so sorry for coughing. But then also, so kind of taking it on, a little bit further, right? Is there are robots, and maybe before, because I got one like actually right here. So I might put it, pull it behind me as we go here, but robots. Now, okay, this sounds a little space age, right? But robot botanical garden, what? Are you kidding me? Well, here's why this could definitely make sense. So this robot here, and we work with a variety of robot manufacturers. So this robot here is both a security robot, but also a concierge robot. So the things that this can do is it can provide escort services. So you can tell it, take me to the restroom, take me to this point of interest in the botanical garden, take me on an entire tour of the botanical garden or a part of the botanical garden and explain every part of it as I'm going by. So it can certainly act as that concierge or as that escort. It also, I was mentioning to Mei Lin, this screen, we're actually turning it into a portrait screen and enlarging it. It can also provide advertising. Because when you sit there and say, wow, this thing must cost quite a bit of money. And I'll be honest with you, they're not cheap. But here's where it gets very, very interesting for the botanical gardens. You can advertise on this. So when you think of like Miracle-Gro, Home Depot, United Airlines, a Lowe's, a Target, so if so one of the things that botanical gardens can't do today is they cannot advertise nationwide, meaning you can't go to the botanical gardens and say, I want to run this ad on everywhere and all the botanical gardens at the same time or at the same time every day, regardless of what time zone they're in. Well, not only does this provide, like I said, those concierge service, escort services, it drives revenue, and you would be shocked to find out how much revenue this actually can generate on a monthly basis. You'd be shocked. To give you an example, those little screens you see on the gas pumps, that gas station is making $300 a month just from that little 7-inch screen at that specific gas pump. So it can significantly drive revenue. Now, here's the other kind of cool thing. It's also a security bot too. It knows if somebody drops a bag and walks away. It knows it can identify a fire. It can identify an open door. It can identify a light that needs to be replaced. It can identify if a person is in a specific area when they're not supposed to be. So it also typically, what we've seen, if you have security guard services and things like that, it usually can reduce that cost of security by 25 to 30%. Essentially a full-time security guard, and that security guard's not looking at their phone all the time. So when we talk about like, oh, well, where does accessibility and safety come in? Well, this is part of it too. Now, the other thing is, let's say you have somebody who needs sign language interpretation. Well, we do have a an avatar, a metahuman, a persona, as it were, that goes on this, that the person can do sign language to. And not only will the robot sign language back, it'll put it in closed caption and speak it as well. So if you do have somebody who that's how they communicate and they have a question, well, that can be part of the tour. It also does language translation in any language you can think of. So also what you could do is say, oh, it's Chinese New Year, come to the Botanical Garden, and you can actually provide a tour in Chinese, through the entire Botanical Garden for that event. Or on Cinco de Mayo, right? So every Cinco de Mayo, I'm pulling my partner John out of a Mexican bar. I'm like, hey, let's go to Cinco de Mayo Day at the New York City, Botanical Garden. So the capabilities of this are extensive, even from a security perspective. And so when we were thinking, like, what's the biggest bang for the buck for the botanical gardens, where, from a cost justification, capabilities and things like that, we're like, this might actually be a little bit better, but we want to talk to more and more gardens. That's why we're going to be at the show with this specific robot. But again, we're going to be changing the screen so where it can generate much more advertising dollars. And when I say, it will blow your mind how much money that these things can actually generate. And if enough botanical gardens decided they wanted to do this, the money you could generate from national advertising, again, you will be shocked at what it could actually do. So, but the thing is, it all goes back to the digital map. So whether it's a kiosk where it's just a fixed kiosk, which we do. So whether it's a kiosk where you provide wayfinding on that kiosk and where you provide a QR code and they can take it with them on their phone and navigate through the garden. And on that kiosk, if it's touch screen, you would certainly want one of Nikki's Storm Interface nav pads. But whether it's a kiosk or whether it, quite frankly, even if you don't have a kiosk, having a digital map that accessibility devices can interact with is going to be, it's already really important. I mean, that's why I started off by saying, listen to what the Cincinnati airport is looking to solve. They're looking to solve, through design, development, and implementation of a comprehensive digital mapping solution tailored for people who are blind or have low vision. And that's how, no pun intended, I think all of us need to start looking at the world and saying, wow, especially with the fact that people who are hearing or physically hearing or sight diminished is going to double, in the next 20 years is significant. And then you sit there and say, well, how many people do not go to the botanical garden because they think, well, I'm sight disabled, so what could I wouldn't even know where to go. And May Lynn started off on this saying, May 15th is Worldwide Accessibility Day. What a wonderful thing it would be if every May 15th all the botanical gardens had celebrated the accessibility and the inclusion of people who are hearing and sight and physically disabled, like literally reached out to those people, as Nikki said, worked with the the local blind schools, or Rochester Institute of the Deaf, but really reached out to them and engaged them. How many more people would sit there and say, yes, this, even though I might be sight or hearing or physically disabled, I get to have the same level of access as everyone else does and can enjoy that. And yeah, we're pretty passionate about it. We don't do that. Honestly, we don't do this for money. We do this because we're trying to change the world and make it more accessible. But
I think as well,
What
it's Dan, don't you think it's often thinking outside the box as well? Because I'm thinking, like say, when you go to a really beautiful botanical gardens and there's flowers in all colours and there's stunning scenery, obviously that's a it's a feast for the eyes, that old saying. But I think as well, it's maybe it's a case of in each individual garden will have different sort of things that attract, like stimulate our different senses. It may be that at certain times of the year or at certain times of the day, when you stand in a certain part of a garden, because a certain flower is in flower at that time of the year and that time of the day, that's the best time to go to experience the scent of those flowers. Or first thing in the morning, because that tree or whatever attracts hummingbees and birds, so you can hear the bird song and whatever. I think it's also because it's all about this storytelling. And I was on a call once, on a conference call for an accessibility team, and there was a gentleman who was a professional. He was a person that, like, say if your gardens had like lovely deep pockets, they would employ this gentleman to do an audio description of walking through these gardens. And you think, well, anybody could do that who's good with words, the green grass and the crocuses waving their little yellow and purple hair, whatever it might be. This gentleman, oh my goodness, he showed us a couple of photographs on his screen and he said, for example, this is what, somebody had asked him to describe this short video, and it was a corporate thing. I think it was how to find his way around a hospital campus, and he was providing an explanation, and oh my gosh, he absolutely brought these photographs to life. So I just think if he had the botanical gardens to look at, he could half tell a story. I mean, obviously he was a paid for person, but again, there's probably people in the local community, storytellers and poetry artists and things, who would love to even volunteer their time to describe the times of the day that you'll get to experience all these other wonderful sensory, joys at the gardens. So I think it's, let's not just focus on the visual as well, or the lack of visual. So yeah, sorry.
Absolutely. I did a presentation recently about everyday wonder, but I asked some questions about, why is it important to be able to access, gardening or nature and these kind of green spaces, and why is it so important? And it was really interesting because one of the responses was, well, because it's actually something that you can experience at different levels. It's not just with one of the senses. You can experience it in many, in almost all of your senses. And so I thought that is just a revelation, right? Because I think we are very much looking at it from a, very visual experience. So I think, what you both are really also pointing to is it's not just about advancing a norm or bringing this mainstream or following a law, but it is actually really enabling how nature or green spaces are a right and not a privilege. That everyone should be able to experience it as equitably as possible as everyone else. And as public institutions who serve the public, I think that this is an obligation to try to push that as much as we can and continue to evolve. But I know, and so this is going to feed into one of the questions, I think, and want to give sufficient time for Q&A, and just looking at the clock as well. I was waiting for this question, so I'm glad, Lisa, thank you so much for asking. What's the price range on some of this technology, right? From the digital mapping to having a robot or a guide bot, or some of the other levels. So you mentioned, Dan, a lot of these could be revenue generating, but let's just talk about the cost first of all.
Sure. So the cost of this, and we're going to be providing a lot of this information also at the show. So please come by booth 210 and meet. You'll be able to meet John, who is got a much bigger personality than me. So we're working with the manufacturer of these robots. We believe, excluding shipping and tax and things like that, but you're probably looking around $40,000 to $47,000 for one of these. But before you freak out, When I say the revenue that could be generated from this would blow your mind, on the low end, I'm going to just say being crazy, crazy conservative, you'll be generating around $3,000 per month per screen. So that's when I say, and I've actually, there's another one of our folks who is a chief financial officer, but depending on the time of year, the events that you have, what it is that you're advertising, are you able to do nationwide advertising for like a Walmart or Home Depot on like Mother's Day or something like that? It can actually get up towards the 5,000 or 6,000. Now, these are not numbers that we made up. We've actually talked to Lamar. We've talked to Outfront, all of the big advertisers to say, is this even reasonable to, what should we expect? So it, and it's not a one-time purchase. You can actually, lease this over a period of 3 to 4 years. There's things that you could do as far as auctioning off the naming of the robot, because every robot needs a name. So you can auction off the name to help defray that cost as well. You can also put a wrap around it to, again, reduce that cost as well. And if you have it double up and do security duty, well, you can also save on security as well. Now, we also have robots that are designed specifically for outdoors and that can roam all over, especially at night, through the gardens. These things also, by the way, from a security perspective, do you know the difference between, do you know what a scream sounds like? Do you know what a gunshot sounds like? Do you know what something, glass breaking sounds like? So, they can identify these things. They can distinguish a person from an animal as well, which I think was one of the questions. So, this is like, AI, out there, and which is actually becoming more common anyway, but it's amazing how fast all of these things are moving. But
Hey, Dan, make
shut me
mention
up
too.
because I'll keep
No,
talking.
no. I was going to say, make mention too of how it responds to the elements.
Yeah, so John, when you mean like water, wind, rain?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So some of these could actually be, you know, we say there's what's called IP55 rated. So a device that's IP55 rated is can it stand up to dust? Can it stand up to water, splashing on it? Then there's what's called IP65, which means you can set it out in a driving rain, basically a hurricane, and it will keep on functioning. So the external robots that we have specifically for external, those that would be like, let's say they're roaming the botanical gardens at night, doing surveillance, things like that. It can operate literally in a hurricane. They're actually looking at using these for, like FEMA, for things like that. So, when you're seeing all the tornadoes or hurricanes and things like that, places where people can't go, they're looking to deploy these things too, because you can also, quite frankly, remote into it. So the security personnel could actually remote into it and see what the robot sees, given the right security and things like that. So, yeah, it can hold up to the elements.
This is fascinating, just to think about all of the range of possibilities and capabilities that this technology can offer. One of the questions, and I'm gonna, at this point, I know we've got about maybe 10 minutes left, open it up for questions from folks. But I do want to mention that in the Idea Lounge at the conference this year, I'll be hosting just 30-minute coffee break talks in the Idea Lounge, and Dan is joining me along with our manager of corporate partnerships at Denver Botanic Gardens to have a conversation about revenue how does this work? And one of the areas that I know Denver and her work specifically focuses on is B corporations. And these are for-profit corporations, but also for good, right? So their whole goal is that profit isn't bad, profit can also be used for good. And so she's been working on a lot of different partnerships that are really advancing our revenue here at the Gardens through things like sponsorships. So when we talk about screens or being able to display things, I think about Rainbird, or I think about, Park Seeds, and I think about the what is it projected in 2026 to be a $40 billion global industry. Public gardens are sitting in the sector, right, that faces the public, but the back end of that in the horticulture industry, it is expected to reach $40 billion. And what we're seeing is gardening, despite the fears of recession and fears of, people conserving money towards vacation or, retail, we're seeing actually double-digit skyrocketing in gardening happening, right? So this is an opportunity. And we know that from pandemic, gardening, along with sourdough bread, went exponentially higher because people were looking for agency. People are looking for the things that make them feel better or connect them in a way to something bigger than themselves, and that really help with our wellness. And so this is the opportunity that I think that we are facing here in this sector. So I think we don't need to be all doom and gloom. We should be, of course, conservative in some ways, but I think it's always an opportunity. And I think this is that kind of bridge to that conversation is around all of these different technologies. I'm going to share. Go ahead.
If I may, I'm going to
Yeah.
answer one quick question, because there is the CBTA, the CBTA Act. There's a comment from Denise, I think, that says focuses on streaming services, 911, 911, emergency systems, different from ADA. You're absolutely right. Here's the interesting thing, is buried in that, is that it requires organizations to future proof their disability access, which means they have to be forward looking in terms of the technology that you put forward to. So it's not just today. It actually, should this bill pass, and I think it, stands a good chance here, but it requires organizations to be looking forward.
Thanks, Dan. When you were talking about accessibility and spaces, one of the things that I just recalled, one of the instructors for the cohort is Freya McGregor. She's a disabled birder. And I provided a link to an accessibility checklist from the Birdability website. And there's a lot of parallels between people going out birding and going into gardens, right? Or parks or outdoor spaces. So that's a really great, it's not about checking all the boxes, but look at the things that people that are in similar kind of activities who are disabled, what they're going to think about. And I think that's a great resource. But I think there's probably some of that overlap with, what are some of the technology capabilities that can help, potentially offset some of that as well. So again, I'm going to put this out there for any other questions. Please put them in the chat and we'll address that. And I think while we are looking at potential additional questions in the chat, I guess the question that I'm going to fire off here to John and Dan and Nikki is, I think a lot of what you were talking about is very futuristic, but except it's happening now. But where do you continue to see it going?
Yeah, that all of this, I've been in technology for a while. I'm the former chief technology officer of JetBlue. We were the first ones to put an electronic flight bag into a commercial airliner and do away with maps. And that was back in 2005. And I'll tell you, I am shocked at how fast all of this is moving. I am shocked. The whole physical AI, the merging of the physical with the digital it's shocking how fast it's all moving. I think in the next 5 years, 7 years for sure, you will see robots picking fruit out in the fields. You won't be seeing people do that job anymore. You'll see security forces definitely augmented by robots. We are in conversations with Homeland Security regarding the Olympics, as well as a few other parties, about saying, like, look, you're going to need translation services. You're going to need to have sign language services. You're going to want to be able to, not Homeland Security, but the different venues that are out there for the Olympics that's going to be in LA. You're going to want to be able to do some advertising to support the cost of the robot, but you're also going to need wayfinding to tell people, where to go. But guess what? You also need security too, in case somebody actually drops a bag, walks away, is doing something suspicious. Not that they are doing something suspicious, but it's just a double check, right? So this is all happening so very fast, but and it's just intriguing to me how accessibility and focusing on accessibility leads to safety.
Yeah.
And it's just not something that you would make a connection to, but it's like, wow, it really does. And like I said, for the public gardens, we focused very hard. How does the public gardens, not only how do the, afford accessibility digitally, but then so also, how do we actually make money from this too? How does it drive revenue? So it's not a
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah. And I think that is always, when we talk about inclusivity and equity, there is this moral line, but there's also a realistic, we're still a business at the end of the day, right? We're still a part of this system that we have to operate within, and try to serve as many people as we can. And we're a lot of us are from historic institutions that have been around for a long time, and so repaving everything is sometimes not really attainable. So I think that's where I think this conversation is coming from. And you brought a good point, right? Like, with so much of technology advancements and how quickly it's advancing, I think one of the areas that I've been interested in, I pay attention to, is the kind of human-centered technology. And I put a link in the chat to the Center for Humane Technology. And I think there's a lot of great conversations in that space. I think the thing we just have to remember from what we're doing is we can't discount the revenue. We can't discount the fact that we want to create safe environments and accessible environments, but also we do want to continue to be able to be relevant in our communities, and also continue to advance the work towards our missions, right? That, like, we are mission-centered nonprofits, generally speaking. And so I think we are obligated to think about things from this like human-centered technology approach. And then the second thing I'm going to say, an observation of what you were saying, Dan, is that, to me, I think it sounds like the future of a lot of this of these capabilities and services is really providing a sense of agency, tied up with independence, a sense of freedom for people with disabilities who have not been able to have that in the past, right? That sense of agency and being able to be independent, I think, is really huge.
Yeah, you don't see it in the news a lot. You see it some, not enough. But what
No.
artificial intelligence is doing for good in terms of people with disabilities is nothing short of earth shattering. It is just a seismic shift in providing access and experience.
Yeah.
It's a profound shift.
it's easy for us to think about the perceptions, right? And I think most of us, when we think about AI, we think of like dystopian future. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to us? We're all going to get replaced by robots. And there's like, seriously, that is like an existential fear. I think some folks really feel we're going to disconnect from our humanity. And I think that's where a lot of conversation is just, we have to think about it in different dimensions. Because I think that even in the past, with the advent of the telephone or the automobile or a computer, where people were already like, absolutely not. I remember having to take my first computer programming class back in like, I don't know, it was like 1980 something. I swore to God after that I was never going to work with a computer because it was awful. And a lot
I say that every day.
I still feel that way, but at the
When
same
my internet's going down. Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, whenever there's new technology, there are questions about how do we do this responsibly? And I think we're just in another industrial revolution when it comes to technology and AI. And we do need to remember that there's still a place for human connection, and some of that can be bridged or weaved in with technology. And how do we convey that? So I want to, at this point, thank Daniel, Nikki, John, the IDEA community, the education community, and the American Public Gardens Association for allowing the space for this very futuristic and probably very different conversation than what we probably had in the past. But I hope it's been helpful. And if anything, just kind of enlightens everyone to all the things that are happening in this space. So again, I just want to thank everybody again for having us as guests, and I'll hand it back over to the education community.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was an amazing presentation. Really appreciated hearing from everyone. Malin, Daniel, Nikki, thank you. Like, what a wealth of information just to unpack and think about. So thank you. Again, Libby Rhodes, I am the incoming vice chair of the Ed community here. So I'm very excited to be working with Sarah. And I just want to encourage anybody who's going to conference this year to please check in at the opening night event. We'll have a table. You can drop in and say hi to some colleagues, share some thoughts and ideas about where you think we should be heading, what sort of programs maybe we might want to do, or upcoming webinars. Our upcoming education symposium is August 18th through 20th, 2026. It'll be at Missouri Botanical Garden. So mark your calendars right now. Start thinking of cool ideas that you might want to submit to present. Start putting some pennies and dollars into your budget for attending that, because that'll be really fun too. So yeah, very excited for all the opportunities this community has. And if you have webinar ideas, our next one will be in August. We'll be happy to hear them as well. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.